Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
And this is Dan Abuhoff.
Hey, don't step on my lines.
Sorry.
Okay? It's Sunday, March 8th,
Right.
2020.
Right.
And we always think of Ralph Abuhoff.
It's the anniversary of my father's birth, 98 years ago.
Right.
Passed away a few years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
So, lots of fond memories there. And moving right along, and we got another birthday coming up this week.
I'm looking at you.
Mark Snyder.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Friday the 13th.
Okay, I'm not going to disagree.
I could be wrong.
Disagree.
But happy birthday, Mark.
It's not going to be 98. That's what I know.
No, he's not.
He's a young guy.
He's a very young guy.
Yeah.
He's just a kid.
Right. Enjoy your birthday, Mark. Enjoy, consider this your present from Tamsen and Dan. All right. So in terms of, we've been busy. We've always been busy, right? We started right in last Monday. We traveled to New York City, and we went to see
many adventures in New York City.
Yes,
yes.
You should talk about that.
I actually went to a pigment store with Lisa Walsh.
There aren't many pigment stores.
Apparently not.
Yeah.
And pigment is what you use to introduce color into other media, like oil paint, watercolors, tempera, etc.
Cremers,
so
right?
it's the color essence.
Nice.
And sometimes it's natural. Many different kinds of black there were from burned vines, burned bones,
God.
etc.
Yeah.
And and there was ground up lapis lazuli, malachite.
Yeah, well, look, what's great about this...
And then there were synthetics. Anyway, it was
not that it was
a little niche. It was a little crazy niche of a store with many magical colors in it.
Here, as I understand, it's sort of a German store for real, I don't want to say fanatics, aficionados, people into pigment, into painting.
Making your own paint, basically.
In some store, which I presume wasn't so terribly large, on like 28th Street or something like that.
29th Street.
That's the kind of thing you find in New York City.
Exactly.
And a lot of other stuff.
And I was afraid to go there by myself.
Oh, you went with Lisa.
But I went with an artist.
And she's tough.
So that I had some cred.
Exactly.
And apparently a lot of not only creative artists, but conservators go there because they're trying to recreate various kinds of color and paint that were used in works of art that they're repairing. I
talked to my friend Harry, the former artist, about this, and he said, that stuff's not cheap. And I think that's right. He also said that...
I would say Harry's still an artist.
Yes, okay.
Even if he's not supporting himself.
I agree with that.
With art, I would always think of Harry as an artist.
Fine. Point of the story is it's not cheap. The other point of the story is Harry told me, he said pigments are nice, but when they invented paint and tubes, it was a big advancement, and he takes advantage of that. So he's not a pigment guy himself. But, for those who are totally into it, like yourself.
He's a house paint guy.
House paint guy. Well, I worked at Pearl Paints. Okay. So, and then we got something to eat. We went to see something at Classic Stage, something they call Classic Conversations, in which they have, in this case, Michael Cerveris, an artist, a performer, in a conversation with John Doyle, who's the artistic director at Classic Stage.
So it's your opportunity to sit in on an intimate conversation.
Intimate, right. With
John is a famous director. He doesn't produce.
No.
I would call him a director.
Director, yes.
And he's Scottish?
Oh, Tamsen, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm asking hard questions.
I think he is, actually.
Michael Cerveris.
Michael Cerveris has been in certain productions with him, so they know each other as well. Michael Cerveris
has been in
very accomplished, a lot of things. He Tommy, going back a few years. The rock opera, yes. Titanic, we enjoyed seeing him in Titanic years ago. We love that musical. He was in Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
He was in a revival of Sweeney Todd.
So, and he was in Fun Home. He's won 2 Tonys. He's big time. He's a big star.
And he wears his hair similar to you.
In other words, he pretty much shaves his head. which means he's an extremely good-looking individual.
Yes.
And he was an interesting guy. He's an interesting guy. So, we've seen him in where he's generally singing something quite sophisticated with almost an English accent. Certainly a gentleman is the kind of person he's usually playing when we've seen him, as it happens. But it turns out he has more range than that. He's from West Virginia.
Right.
And he says he grew up with a West Virginian twang, and he plays the guitar. And these conversations are punctuated by little performances. He did 6 different songs. The first one he did was Tommy. He picked up the guitar and
acoustic
guitar. And he sang a number from Tommy. It was, and he sounded like a rock star. And he didn't sound English at all because he's not. But then he told his story, which explains a little bit how his accent changed. He went to Exeter Academy, went to Yale.
Well, let's start at the beginning.
Yes.
I'm not going to give a lot of details, but his dad was a music professor.
Right.
So he grows up in the business.
Although
he doesn't really consider himself a musician.
Right.
Compared to the kind of
even now
people he grew up around.
So here's the secret. Here's his secret weapon. He's a wonderful actor, but many people are. But he can sing. He never quite explains how he got that, except he took lessons at Yale. But he can really sing.
Well, if your daddy's a music professor, you might grow up with an ear. I think if you have an ear, it helps you sing.
But he didn't grow up singing. And he says he's kind of developed it accidentally as a sideline at Yale. And he thought of himself as an actor when he went out into the wide world. And look, we're not going to take the time here to tell his whole life story, but he's an interesting guy and an intellectual guy.
You can spend the money and go to one of these events yourself.
Exactly right.
But here's the thing, though.
Yeah.
He grew up in pretty rarefied circumstances.
There's no question. It's not
to go from Exeter to Yale,
and then
drama,
and then graduate school, and then right, and so he's kind of he's got quite the education. He's quite an educated guy. He seemed like a very nice guy, very interesting guy. So it was interesting listening to him.
He did a lot of regional theater,
right? But it worked out for him because one of the first regional productions he did was at La Jolla in California, and that was Tommy. And they said, "Hey, let's take it to Broadway," and that's what got his Broadway career going. Shazam! It is. Well, Shazam for a guy as talented as he is. So in any event, it's interesting to hear that kind of informal conversation and performances. And you use the word intimate. It's a small group. Maybe you have 60, 70 people there in the theater.
No, it was more than that.
Okay, 80. I mean, so that was interesting. I will just say that there's another one coming up. It's Judy Kuhn at Classic Stage. It's on May 17th, which is a Sunday evening at 7 o'clock. Judy Kuhn has been most recently in Fun Home. You hear her on the Broadway channel because she was one of the people involved in chess, which was initially just a recording before it was a play. And there are devotees of chess who love the music to chess.
Yeah, I would love to see chess, actually.
Oh, yeah. There have been 1 or 2 performances. But in any event, so Judy Kuhn's...
Of course, I'm always wrong.
A real performer.
Mac and Mabel.
Yeah, right.
I was wrong about that.
That's not always wrong, but...
I'm pretty much wrong.
Yes. My point is Judy Kuhn. May 17th at Classic Stage. If you're interested in this kind of thing, you just get on the website and you can go. So we went to that on Monday, and then last night we went to the movies, right?
Right.
We saw The Way Back, the Ben Affleck movie. It's gotten a lot of publicity because...
Yeah, I mean, just a few nights ago, we were saying to Tom Walsh, our friend, "Oh, that movie. Right. Who wants to see that?"
Yeah.
And, of course, we ended up seeing it.
Well, there's a couple of reasons we saw it, and I'll come back to the subject in a minute. One is it got a decent Rotten Tomatoes rating. It was 89 across the board, both critics and audience, which is pretty good, actually, which is very good. But the other reason is, again, I'll come back to, there's not a lot to see. So in any event, we went to see it, and it's gotten a lot of publicity because Affleck's had personal demons, as what they like to say in the business, alcoholism, maybe even drug use, and he's working his, quote, way back. And so he was the natural hire for this movie about a guy who's a former basketball star who meets some misfortune, who, dives into alcoholism and works his, quote, way back through the opportunity of being the basketball coach at the high school where he was a star. That's the basic story. And it sounds a little too cute, maybe a little too saccharine on the surface, but I didn't find the movie too saccharine at all. Did you?
No, I mean, it was predictable in many ways.
Yeah.
But lots of stories are pretty predictable.
Mm-hmm.
And how they're played out is what makes the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you felt this had a gritty aspect.
Yes.
That made it engaging.
Right. I mean, he's turning around the fortunes of a high school basketball program, in his case, a Catholic school. And the kids, as presented, are losing every game, and they don't look very talented. And on the basis of his coaching, insight, basketball knowledge, they rise to something above mediocrity. But the bigger story is really about his fight with turning himself around and getting hold of his personal problems and his alcoholism. So I thought it was good. I thought it was very engaging. And
it's poignant.
And I thought, but it's not a big movie. I would call it a small movie, which is not a criticism. It's it's a small budget movie, but it's as a character study and as a story within the character study, I thought it had sort of it was real. Yeah,
what scene I like the best is when he's talking to one of the players. He's giving him a ride home,
right?
And the player says, "My dad told me that you were a superstar and offered a full ride to such and such a school.
To Kansas, yeah.
And you didn't go.
Yeah.
You just threw it all away.
Yeah.
And he said, why'd you do that? And the Affleck character goes on to say, well, to explain it in terms of, turns out the only thing that my dad cared about was not me, it was my basketball. Right. And so I just quit. And the kid says, so that was basically an FU to your dad. And he said, yeah, I guess so. And that was an interesting little story. And it sort of points out that idea that, you shouldn't be going through life just kind of trying to respond to everyone about you. You kind of have to live
it's not your
everyone. Own life.
It's his father. But yeah.
Yeah, but still, it's letting other people make decisions for you based on reacting to what you think.
I agree. Look,
you're thinking. So it was moments like that I felt that took it another step, another level. But beyond just the feel good,
right?
Turning the team around. Although the turning the team around, now you thought the basketball was pretty realistic.
Yeah, it was. I thought it was.
But I thought it was so nutty that, the first couple games they lose. Yeah. And he's devastated. Yeah. And then they win every single game after that.
But let me point something out about this.
That was pretty Disney-esque.
Let me point something out about basketball coaching, okay? This was a ragtag group of guys, the kids playing, who were totally disorganized. He walks in and he has...
And undisciplined.
Undisciplined. He walks in and he has instant cred in a way no one else would because he is the all-time hero of that school. So they're listening to him in a way they would listen to nobody else. Okay, don't forget that.
But also, he's a guy who feels at home in basketball, so he can talk that way.
Yes, but it's much more that they see him. Yeah, that, let me finish. That's point one. Point two is he knows the game, right? So he's organizing them in a way that they're going to be spaced properly and they can have some kind of framework. And number three, I can tell you from coaching, even though it's a challenge, the idea of bringing a terrible team to a medium level is more achievable than bringing a medium team to a championship level. So he takes a terrible team and brings them to a medium level. They beat a lot of medium teams. Now, the one game that was unbelievable was the last game.
They end up in the championship. Right?
No, they end up in the playoffs.
Okay, which is different. That seems
if you have a 500 record, you're in the playoffs. So,
so you think that's believable, conceivable?
Yeah, it was push the boundaries.
But how it's still kind of rare, isn't it, for a player to really have the insights of a coach?
Well, he wasn't going to make the team any better than he made. You know what he had? He had one superstar kid. Okay. That's what made it work. If he doesn't have that kid on the team, all right, then he can't do anything.
But that kid didn't even know he was a superstar.
Yes, he spotted that. Okay. So Affleck comes in and spots that.
All right, and you're going to talk later more about player coaches.
But I'll tell you one. I'll say one thing that struck me as real is when he talks to this kid. They have a critical game, critical moment, and they're down by a point, and his star brings up the ball, dribbles it, and they run some play, and he passes it to some guy in the corner. He hits a shot, and they win the game. And he talks to, he's giving the kid, the star, a ride home later. And he says, the kid goes, great, we won the game. He says, nice you made the pass. He said, do me a favor. So what's that? Next time, don't make the pass. He said, the star said to him, what are you talking about? That's the play. That guy's open. He said, I don't care. You're my best player. Best player shoots. And that's true.
And you asked me if I was surprised, and I was surprised. Yeah. Because how many times have I sat in on lectures to everybody about pass the ball, pass the ball, pass the ball? You do. And there's always some wiseacre kid on the team who thinks he'll never miss. Right. And he won't pass to anybody. Right. And the whole lesson is... yes, except
you're
for not the best on the team, right? So you got to pass.
Yes, that kid's not the best player. Right. He's in the last minute. You let your best player play. So that's the way the game is played.
So that's the way back.
But in any event, so the way back, I think it's kind of worth seeing. Although it's not a miraculous movie. It's not a super movie. It's not going to be nominated for Best Picture, but it's worth seeing. But as I said before, there wasn't a lot to see. So there was an article in the Journal about how movie theaters are struggling a little bit and what they're doing to respond. And, this article was written by John Stoltz in their business section. And he says, well, movie theaters can give up or they can do something about it. So the movie theaters we have in this area have given up, right? I mean, they're kind of awful.
Well, it's both. I mean, clearly the place we went last night, it was a big theater and it struggles.
Yeah, but they just give up. They don't have people taking your tickets. They have kind of lousy service.
They're struggling. They're trying to economize.
I understand. You sit down and instead of having the movie start on time, they're still showing advertisements for 10 minutes. I mean, it's kind of awful. But the other way to do it, as this guy points out, is you can invest in your product, try to make it better. And the most, by having better sound, better pictures, better offerings of the snack bar and these reclining seats. Now, I don't really care too much about reclining seats, but it's a different attitude to say, no, I just have to make the product better. And Stoll claims that that's rewarded, that when you refurbish the theaters with the reclining seats, you're losing seats. But the truth is 95% of the time, you're only selling 15% of your seats anyway. And
also the seats are reserved. In those situations,
and the seats are reserved.
Those seats are always, you pick them out and you reserve it, whether it's online or when you get there. Yeah. So you're guaranteed. Right. So, but look, I'm not saying what people should do, but it's like any other product which is under pressure. Whatever you're selling, whether you're selling bananas or you're trying to sell movie tickets, you either say, look, I'm just going to get every nickel I can out of this dying business, or you say, I'm going to reinvest it and try to make it a superior product. And, those are the two roads open to. The other thing I ran into that was kind of interesting that's related to this, there was an interview with Aaron Sorkin in the Times Magazine section about movies generally and how do you attract an audience or not an audience in the so-called dying movie business. So Aaron Sorkin is the writer.
Well, most recently of To Kill a Mockingbird.
Right.
But
also...
of A Few Good Men and of, notably, The Social Network.
And what was the TV show he had?
He had The West Wing.
The West Wing. Okay,
right.
So he is a guy with a lot of credibility in terms of writing. And he's a great writer.
So here's what he says about this. He says, I don't think, he says, with the exception of A Few Good Men, because it had Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson, exception. He said, this is Sorkin. I don't think any movie I've ever written would be made today. And I'm including The Social Network, which won all kinds of Oscars and was a financial hit. These days, it's easier to get a $100 million movie made than a $30 million movie made. So the only movies that you see are $100 million movies or $3 million movies, which is just very easy to finance and to get going. But the $30 million movies don't get made. And the odd thing about it, those so-called middle movies, is when you're watching the Oscars and they're showing you the clips from the great movies of the past, those are all middle movies. And those are not being made. And that's the way the industry is going. So there's
because they're happening on television.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And he says that's fine. But he says this is what you've heard Scorsese say before. It's no substitute for getting a lot of people in a theater and reacting as a group to whatever the film is. That's a superior experience. Right. And that's not going to be, whatever it is, it is. So, this movie, The Way Back, is probably a $3 million movie, honestly. But that's fine. I still think it's worth seeing.
Really?
Yeah, that costs nothing.
You can do anything for $3 million.
Well, $5 million.
With a star in it.
I don't think Affleck got paid too much for that movie. But I don't know. But you have the big story. With everybody talking about voting
Yeah.
Voting. You have an insight into voting, which I was unaware of.
Yes, so I saw a very fun article from this week in the New York Times by Elizabeth Preston that was titled "How Animals Vote."
Yes.
So, more and more we learn about so many interesting things about animals, either about their brains or about their social functioning. So it was really fun to read this article and see how animals, make group decisions to do various things, right? So I'm just going to share a couple of them that caught my eye. One is honeybees. So when honeybees are deciding to split off and develop a new hive or something, they send out scouts, okay? There are certain honeybee scouts who go out looking for, viable locations. Right. And when they've found something they like, a scout comes back, and for the rest of the hive, they do a certain dance, which spinning around and waggling, etc., and flying, and that describes where and what it is somehow to the rest of the crowd. And if people are interested, if other bees are interested, they join in the same dance.
Only bees.
Until there's like a critical mass of bees doing this waggly dance. That means they'll all go to this other place. So that's one way of functioning. Another was talking about meerkats. Yeah. And meerkats are so cute, Anyway, it turns out that meerkats kind of roam around in a group, not especially close to each other, not like a little close herd. They may be 30 feet apart, but they're basically in a group. And, they'll move around, they'll get on the move to do something, and then they'll stop and rest. And then there's this certain call that they have, this mew, that means, okay, I'm done, I'm ready, let's get back on the move. And if you have at least, you need at least 3 to be making that noise to get on the move. And then people will move, which makes some sense. Yeah. It's like any idea in a group with people, right? If one person says, well, why don't we get pizza? Maybe it doesn't change anything. Right. But if 3 people say, hey, yeah, that's a good idea. Boom, you go. So the meerkats have that, the mew. And then there was also African wild dogs. Now, African wild dogs have this great rally thing they do, jump, greet, get together, and maybe they'll take a snooze afterwards, or maybe they'll go for a hunt. And the way that's decided is by a sneeze. There's a particular sneeze that they do that means, let's go hunt. Now, how many dogs need to do that to mobilize the group? If a dominant dog does it first, then for some reason only, 2 or 3 other dogs need to sneeze, and then everybody else will go, okay, let's hunt. If a subordinate dog in the pack introduces the sneeze, then it seems you need at least like 10 other sneezers to catch on. And then the group will mobilize. Yeah. Okay. So it's all kind of fun. There were other examples like ants and baboons. And so it was a great little lesson in voting from the animal world.
It sounds more complicated than the primary system. It's more like a caucus, really, when you think about it.
Yes, that's exactly the way they put it in the article.
Is that right?
Yes.
Which means it's complicated.
How do you create a caucus?
Those caucus systems don't always work smoothly, so you got to work on it.
So that was fun. Elizabeth Preston. Yeah. How Animals Vote in the New York Times.
All right. Well, let's go back to basketball because we've gotten off the subject.
Yeah, because we did spend the whole weekend
watching basketball.
Well,
college basketball is interesting. So there's an article. It is kind of interesting.
You always say that. You always say that when you're watching a college basketball game, look how these guys are playing. Look how much heart is in the game, right? As opposed to the pros. Because, they may be quite nonchalant. They're doing it day in, day out.
Well, especially when you see, the tournament's could be coming up. By the time we put this broadcast up, the NCAA tournament will have begun. And that's exactly what that is.
Is that true? It starts this week?
It starts a week from Tuesday. So, well,
No.
a week from then. I'm sorry, a week from then. Yeah.
So we're building up to it.
We're building
We're
up
getting
to it.
in shape.
Get your brackets ready.
Yeah.
I know your mother
got my
is.
jigsaw puzzle ready.
Yeah.
So I can be doing that while you're watching every
you,
minute.
You say that, but you watch college basketball. You know that. So there's an article in the Times about Swarthmore, which is kind of responsive to your point about is it plausible that a coach comes in and takes a crappy team and makes them a real good team real fast. And if you read the article fast, that's what went on at Swarthmore. This guy, Landry Kosmowski, comes in and he takes a school which has been losing for 25 years and makes them a top Division III team, just like that, snaps his fingers. And then you read the article a little more closely, and you realize he got the job 8 years ago. And what he did
Another overnight success.
Yeah, exactly. And here's what happens in 8 years. In 8 years, you introduce a new system, you introduce a new way of doing things, and you get all new players because he's recruiting his own players. The guys who were there when he got there, his first 3 years, they're winning an average of 7 games a year, 7 out of 30.
But you still have to be able to attract a better player.
Listen,
right?
I'm not giving this guy credit, but I'm saying I'm crediting you for the point that walking into the high school basketball team or any team and taking the same guys and making them winners in 3 weeks, it really pushes the boundaries much more than saying, I'll ride it out with these fellas while I put in my system and I recruit. So he's got a different kind of athlete coming in, and that's what he's got.
What were you saying about they had some kind of touchy-feely?
All right, so there are two things going on. So the Times, I'm not blaming the Times. This is not criticism. But this is the way they present the program. Sure, they got different players. That's all great. But what really is interesting is the practices that he's employed. And what he's done is he has all kinds of what he calls positive reinforcement triggers. I'm just turning the page here to foster bonds among the team. So what does that mean? That means that during each timeout, each of the players grabs, I can't put it that way, sort of touches the shorts of the guy next to him, sort of on the side, to show that they're all close. They're all bonding.
They're linked, yeah.
They're linked all the time.
And there were pictures of the guys standing
holding each other's
out.
shorts, yes. They talk about the fact that at the end of a practice, the team gathers to issue put-ups, the opposite of put-downs, Kosmowski said, pointing out something a teammate or coach did well that day. How's that? There are all kinds of rituals to make things as positive as possible. And why? And where does this come from? Kosmowski searches for ways to improve the program largely on the basis of a TED Talk that he saw a few years ago by a fellow named Sean Achor, whose book, The Happiness Advantage, lays out how positivity can lead to a more productive work environment.
Okay, so Ben Affleck did not read that book.
No, he took a different approach. But this guy says, Ben Affleck took the opposite approach. He did what every coach does. Yeah, his character. Yeah. He did what every coach does when they have a bad team. He says, we're going to press and play a pressing defense. And the way you do that is you condition your team. And you saw the team running stadium steps the whole time. That's what you do, frankly. That's what I would do if I was coaching that team.
Well, you're not exactly Mr. Positivity.
Yeah, right. So it's the harder it is, the more we're going to accomplish. He's got the opposite approach. He says, look, it's about making things as positive as possible, developing an optimistic outlook. That's what's going on. All right, so maybe that works. The team is almost undefeated this year and has become a powerhouse. Maybe it's the guys he's recruiting. Probably it's a combination of everything. What it does point out is that basketball is an extremely psychological sport, okay? What you do is you do whatever you do physically to get the guys ready. But if you can create a psychological environment such that they feel that they have an advantage, such that they feel they're going to win because there's some secret sauce that you have cooked up with them and they've been participating in, you're helping the team. You're helping the team a lot. I mean, because the psychology is self-fulfilling. The best example of that is the so-called phenomenon of the hot hand. You've heard that phrase, the hot hand, all the time, and it comes from basketball.
Oh, is that what they were talking about?
That's what they were talking about. So, I
might have misunderstood that.
Yes. So, the guy...
It was either the warm hand.
Yes, hits a shot, and then hits another shot. You hear people saying, give it to the guy with a hot hand. He's hot. Give it to him. He's going to hit his next shot. And there's been much debated over the years in psychology that is that really a thing? Is that real or is it not real? And psychologists have debated that for years. And if you ask any basketball player in the pros, like LeBron James, he says, yeah, they can debate all they want. Of course it's a hot hand thing. Of course you give it to the guy with a hot hand. And there's an article...
The guy who's in the zone.
The guy who's in the zone. There's an article in the journal about a guy named Mark Turmel who invented one of the all-time successful video games of all time, which is some years ago. It was NBA Jam. And he says the reason that it was successful, because he had a so-called hot hand element in it. That if a player hit a couple shots in a row, the so-called voiceover announcer in the game would say, oh, he's heating up. If he hit the third shot in a row, flames would come out of his hand, and he was guaranteed to hit the next shot. This became a $1 zillion seller, and he all attributes it to the hot hand. So, again, it's a lot of a psychological.
Probably, this positivity thing... and the hot hand thing can be applied to a lot of aspects of life.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And, years ago I had read something about when you're teaching students, because that's what I do, you, to some extent, you encourage them to believe they can do this.
Right.
They can, conquer this material, etc., and they will.
And it's even more concrete if you can say one of the reasons you can do it is because the exercises we've been doing translate into that success. It never fails. And if they see a little success while they do the exercise, they begin to believe it. Right. So, that's what this guy at Swarthmore is doing.
And
so you're holding the shorts. That's why we're winning.
Okay. And, if they believe that, maybe it works.
No question. All right. So here we have a big investment in a food segment here.
Yes.
Yes. Go ahead.
Because we've been eating a lot.
Yes.
But possibly not the right foods.
Oh, no, yes, we have.
Okay, a big article by Mark Bittman and David Katz in the Wall Street Journal. We actually know what we should eat. And Bittman's point is basically that most animals eat the right thing for their species. Yeah. And that we used to know that. But we kind of lost sight of that with the 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century development of all these mass-produced foods that much of which is not really good for us. The junk food, etc. Of course, the caveman didn't have junk food, etc. and so forth. And we have these processed foods has really caused havoc. So Bittman actually writes a lot of articles about what we should eat now. And he does point out that there are a lot of, studies about all of this, and they all seem to contradict each other at this point, because we have in this room two people, one, I am a, firm breakfast eater and believer in breakfast. You are not. And there are studies saying breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And then for a while, another study came out recently saying not so much. In fact, people are into this idea of, fasting over a certain number of hours in the course of a day's eating. So that's better done if you don't eat breakfast and just eat lunch and dinner. And then as soon as that was published, another, breakfast is the most important meal of the day study came out. But so you don't really know.
But Bittman points this out, but he doesn't have any solutions. He doesn't...
Well, he chooses what studies he believes in, basically. His solution is that you should eat... a lot less meat.
Yeah, okay.
That, in fact, basically what he says is eat beans.
Yes.
All right, beans will do it for you.
Well, that's
beans,
the best food.
Give you protein.
Right.
He says fish is okay.
Yeah.
But you should really eat beans.
Right.
And you should eat a lot more vegetables because vegetables,
plant-based
are
protein.
Available and replaceable and more efficient in terms of the environment, in terms of the cost to raise, etc. So there you have it.
Okay.
Eat some beans. I mean, we eat a fair amount of beans.
But he's not an extremist. He doesn't expect anybody to eat exclusively beans. He just says, it's, if you're really interested in this, think about that. Eat some more
beans. He basically doesn't believe in a lot of things anymore. Dairy, meat, etc. He's had great success with a vegan diet, so there he is.
Well, I was noticing a restaurant review in Brooklyn the other day talking about eating something other than beans. And what was the restaurant's name? I forget it.
Le Crocodile.
Le Crocodile.
The Crocodile in Brooklyn.
And it's a
In
brasserie.
the White Hotel.
And the funny thing is that we discovered this brasserie.
No. Brasserie is a big, bustling place.
Okay, what did we discover?
It comes from a word meaning brewery.
All right.
And it has all the things you expect: oysters, soup, choucroute, etc.
Yeah.
Okay? We apparently have discovered a bistro.
Oh, there you go. Sorry.
Which is a smaller place, historically family-owned, not quite in this case, and specializes in like steak frite, beef bourguignon, white beans, etc. Those typical things.
Well, what's the place in Princeton?
The place in Princeton calls itself Christine's Bistro, a French bistro.
Okay, all right.
And it's part of a bigger operation,
All right,
and it's a little slick.
All right,
but the point is,
liked it.
The review of the Crocodile.
Let's slow down a little bit. We liked the place in Princeton a lot. So then I see the review of the Crocodile, and you tell me, is that advertised a brasserie or a bistro?
Brasserie.
Okay.
Because it is a big, you saw the pictures, it looks fantastic.
All right. Well, that's my point.
It's a big sort of industrial space.
So I'm reading this
there
review.
There are banquettes, there are tables.
Right. Sort of a
tile floors.
Pete Wells review. 3 stars.
3 stars.
Over the top.
Ecstatic.
Unbelievable.
As
the greatest place.
As he was of Peter Luger's.
Right. He loves this place.
Ago, he adores this place.
And they have some of the same offerings as the place in Princeton.
Similar offerings, but with a slight creativity and attention to detail.
More than slight.
Yes.
More than slight.
Yeah, and but it's not so creative that it's unidentifiable.
No, it all looks great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even the French onion soup looks unbelievable.
Right.
So, and I say to you,
why are we screwing around?
Right.
In this commercial little joint in Princeton?
This place is 10 times better. Costs no more. They give the range of the prices pretty similar, and it's kind of crushing almost. We're going to go back to this place in Princeton when this place in Brooklyn is so fabulous, and you say to me,
don't worry,
we'll
never get into the place in Brooklyn.
Exactly right. If we were in Brooklyn, we'd never get in.
It takes us 20 minutes to get to Princeton.
Well, yes, I know. And I'm not really talking about us.
It could take 2 hours to get to Brooklyn.
But the point is, if we were in Brooklyn, we couldn't get in. That's what I tell myself.
There are reservations available within the next couple of weeks.
For the Crocodile?
Yes, 10:45.
Oh my God!
At night on a Wednesday.
Okay, I feel better already.
So
I'm
it's completely out of our league.
I'm not going to feel bad about a restaurant.
We'll never be clever enough to score a reservation there.
Okay, that's fine.
But
it's out of my mind.
In all fairness, we've had some excellent meals at this, albeit commercial, Jersey-esque interpretation of a bistro.
Yeah.
And frankly, we do go to places that are more creative and aesthetic in New Jersey. They're harder to find than in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the place we love to go in Milford, New Jersey, Canal House Station.
Well, that's a unique place.
Could easily be in Brooklyn.
But they don't serve dinner. Yeah.
They do not serve alcohol.
Don't serve dinner.
Then they don't serve dinner.
Yeah, that's a bigger gap than they don't serve alcohol. But yes. All right. So let's go to the knives point, which I thought was interesting.
Great sort of headline at the front of the off-duty section of the Wall Street Journal this weekend. Why pay $24,000 for a kitchen knife?
Yeah, because we are all doing that.
I didn't quite realize that knives were costing that much. Well, but there was a story. There's this great knife maker, Bob Kramer, and he finished some knife. He put it up on his website at auction, and it started out like $10,000. And it finally sold for $24,000, which was pennies compared to recently. He had made a knife for Anthony Bourdain. Yeah. And so when Bourdain's estate sold that knife,
that's a celebrity knife.
It sold for $250,000. Yeah. Okay. $250,000.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's an article. It's like, should we be buying knives for $24,000, and of course it's part artwork, it's part collector's item, etc. But of course there are other more reasonable knives to be had by great knife crafters. that may only cost $1,800.
Yes, but you came up with a much better idea, which is that they talk about knife sharpening.
Right. Well, so I've had the same. First of all, can I just mention one thing?
Sure.
I looked at the pictures of these knives, and of course, you have chefs buying the fancy knives, but you also have speculators.
Really?
Really, because there's a demand. For Kramer, I think there's like a 3-year wait to get one of his knives. Okay? So some people are buying knives from these famous makers with the idea that they'll hold them for a few years and then maybe sell them at a huge profit. So, of course, the knife makers are not thrilled about that. Most of them are feeling, I'm making this to be used.
Right.
And some of them are beautiful. They're called Damascus knives. And they have this sort of the makers fuse different kinds of steel alloy together there are two things you want. You want something that can get very sharp, but you want something that can hold that sharp edge. Okay? And that's hard to accomplish in the same steel. And by having these different alloys, they're able to do that better and better. And the Damascus, I guess, comes from the idea that they end up having this almost kind of marbled, fabulous look to them. So anyway, there are more reasonable options. $400, $200. Okay. So good. Maybe I'll save up. I've had the same knife since restaurant school in the late 70s, and it was only a Wusthof. And I only had it because that's what the store in the restaurant school sold. Right. Okay. But I was thinking, gee, I do know how to sharpen them myself. I sharpen them myself on my own stone, but it couldn't hurt to have a really super sharpening job done. Now, I assume that in places like New York, there are knife sharpening guys on every other corner somewhere, possibly. And I do see knife sharpeners around here, but it's sporadic. Like the third Tuesday in November, there'll be a knife sharpener at, some place or,
some kitchen store.
Or farmer's market, or something like that. But they, in this article, actually had some suggestions of online services you can go to that do a very good job, including something called, what was the one that appealed to me? Knife Aid. And so you send your knives off, and they come back in 6 days.
That's good.
Which is not bad. So I may avail myself
I think,
of
as
that.
you said, every 20 years, there you go. It's worth it.
Right. And then I would keep it up on my own, right? But at least I would be starting from possibly a super starting place.
All right. I think you ought to do it. I'd rather you do that than buy the
because sharper knives are safer.
$25,000 knife. Yeah. All right. Coronavirus. We're not going to make light of coronavirus.
No.
But couple things that are just kind of interesting.
I am getting notices from my schools that I teach at about the potential that we could be closed down and what can we accomplish online.
That's fair in terms of preparation. They have an article here in the Times called Handshake Jitters, the Danish Naturalizations. And what this article is about is that for people who want to become naturalized citizens in Denmark, there is a ceremony, and the ceremony includes a handshake with the authorities. Literally, that's required, a handshake. And they have a directive in Denmark that people shouldn't be shaking hands because they have 23 cases of coronavirus in Denmark. And as a result, these people all showed up for their citizenship ceremony, and they were not allowed to become citizens because they couldn't do the handshake. And there was a discussion about whether they can waive it or they can't waive it. And Denmark apparently is functional as the U.S. in some ways. Couldn't get themselves around the handshake requirement. So everyone had to go home. And they said, what's a real hardship on some people.
That is so weird. They couldn't figure out a substitute.
Couldn't figure out how to do it. Couldn't fake the handshake.
Is that strong a requirement?
One politician said, can we replace the handshake with the namaste gesture? And that did not carry the day. So there's that. What I found even odder was there was an article called Coronavirus Outbreak Gives New Life to an Old Movie. There's a movie made in 2011 directed by Steven Soderbergh called Contagion, which is a fictional account of a pandemic fictional.
Yeah.
9 years ago. And this movie was never a particularly popular movie, and it was, these catalogs exist for people to stream it, and Warner Brothers, being the producer, listed it as 270 among its catalog titles. Well, in the last month, it's jumped to number 2 because everyone's renting this movie about pandemics called Contagion because it's informative, I guess. They actually quote Barry Jenkins. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, is it true? I mean,
well,
does
it can't be true. It's made up.
I understand, but does it?
Can't be true.
I understand it's not true, but is it a good thing or a bad thing? Is it starting all kinds of rumors that are ill-founded?
I don't know.
Or,
you have to make that judgment.
Is it making people more comfortable?
No, because there's a pandemic that kills 26 million people. Barry Jenkins, the writer and director of Moonlight, rented it with his girlfriend Lulu Wang, who actually was the writer and director of The Farewell. So these are people reasonably intellectual. And he says, I paid $12.99 to watch a 10-year-old movie, which I've never done before. But, quote, it felt like I was watching a documentary that has all these movie stars playing real people. And I'm saying to myself, how can you feel that way? It was 10 years ago, and it's made up.
Right. That's exactly my problem.
Yes.
Okay, because not just in the world of movies, but you see things that are, you read, historical fiction, and then you begin to believe the fiction.
Right.
Okay, so that's my concern. Everybody's going to be watching this and thinking and panicking because this is what's going to happen.
Well, the Times article says, look, there are a couple things in the movies, the measures that they take, like social distancing and the like, and some quarantining resonate because it's the kind of things they're doing here. But the other thing that resonates is, and this is a big theme of the movie, is the work of conspiracy theorists profiting off the spread of disinformation. A big theme of the movie is the spread of disinformation. Jude Law is a character whose sole purpose is spreading rumors and whatever about the virus.
So that he can make money.
So that he can make money. And maybe that's happening too, I don't know. All I know is that Scott Burns, who wrote the Contagion script, says he actually has gotten inquiries from people. He has one that says, one person asked Mr. Burns if he thought it would be safe for him to travel to Hong Kong. And he wrote back, he says, I'm a screenwriter. I don't know. All right? So then there was an article in the Times, finally, which is not about the coronavirus, but by coincidence is getting a handle on worry, stress, and anxiety. And that's a little of an overstatement of what the article does. But it does distinguish, this was useful to me, the difference between worry, stress, and anxiety. Worry is what happens when your mind dwells on negative thoughts, uncertain outcomes, or things that could go wrong. Worry tends to be repetitive, obsessive thoughts. So it's all in the mind. It's productive to some degree because you want to focus on problems ahead of you, but it becomes unproductive if it becomes obsessive. And it talks about what you can do about it. You can sort of mentally say, I'm going to allow myself 10 minutes a day to worry. You can write down your worries. You can push yourself to come up with a plan of action, but you have to be concrete about it. That's distinguished from stress. Worry is psychological. Stress is physical.
Oh, really?
Yes. So stress comes from prehistoric times. When you hear the prehistoric monster or whatever, the saber-toothed tiger coming your way, it prompts a behavioral response. It fires up your limbic system, releasing adrenaline and cortisol, which helps activate your brain and body to deal with the threat. It's real. It's real and it's physical.
Okay. Anxiety?
And you get rapid heart rate, etc. What do you do to control stress? Exercise.
Drink.
Exercise.
Oh,
yes, drinking
really?
too. Yes.
That's disappointing.
Yes. Okay. And anxiety. Anxiety is basically a combination of the two, stress and worry, but it's most often described in our society a response to a false alarm. You're getting worried and your body's reacting as if something's happening, but there's no saber-toothed tiger because it's the worry that's replacing the saber-toothed tiger. So you're overreacting. You're overstimulated. All right. So bottom line, to tie a bow around this, what do you do to deal with worry, stress, and anxiety? Get enough sleep, eat regular, nutritious meals, and exercise. Move your body.
It's the same advice for everything.
I'm sorry. This is the New York Times. All right.
Free from
so
cancer.
If there's anything that comes out of the coronavirus that's positive, and nothing really, the Geneva Auto Show was going to take place this week and it was canceled. So you're saying, how is that positive? Geneva Auto Show, a chance for all these automakers, particularly high-end, to show off their wares. And it's positive because when they canceled it, what happened was the folks who ran the Geneva Auto Show gave all the manufacturers a chance to put together a virtual press day. They each got to do a 10 or 15-minute video from their own headquarters showing clips of their cars, showing their executives describing what they have new coming down the pipe. And they were all assembled in a particular website that you can use to access all these things. And it is, I looked at it, it's kind of fantastic. It's called, I'll just say it, it's GIMSvirtualpressday.ch. GIMSvirtualpressday.ch, and you have each of the presentations from the manufacturers, from Bentley to Porsche to Hyundai, and this is for you, Armand, to Aston Martin, who shows their new Aston Martins coming down the pike as if you were at the Geneva Auto Show, and I thought it was kind of fascinating.
And then finally,
I will just end the quote going back to basketball. All right? Because this is what I think a coach of basketball should really do. There's a book by Michael Feinstein who's written a lot about college basketball, in particular Bobby Knight in Indiana. But this is a book called The Back Roads to March. It's about schools in the Northeast, which aren't necessarily the most glamorous schools. And he focuses on a lot of basketball at the Palestra, which is the sort of the cathedral of college basketball in the Philadelphia area. And he says, Mr. Feinstein sums up everything in the words of a plaque that hangs inside the Palestra, quote, "To win the game is great, to play the game is greater, but to love the game is the greatest of all." And that's what a coach, in my view, should do, is instill a love of the game. So that's what we have in our podcast this week. This is Dan Abuhoff.
And Tamsen Granger with Dan.
Tamsen and Dan read the paper. Your first build, honey.
You know, I'm a giver. What can I say?
Okay.
See you next week.
Thanks.